I'm Janet Romero, and this is Black Coffee Poet. I lived one. I lived when it was shameful to admit ser indígena, when indio was equivalent to homo and spick and drunk, and almond eyes, canela brown skin, and thick black hair was frowned upon and straightened and colored, when it was acceptable to wear foundation 1 or even 2 shades lighter to accompany your perfectly accented colonized tongue, and heels so high you could barely walk. I lived when brown girls and boys dreamed to be blonde with blue eyes, never painted ourselves brown, and always played the cowboy antes del indio, when Christians were the civilized and Indians the savage, when stealing land was applauded and children were displaced to be replaced with Bible reading, potato eating, communion receiving, beige skin wanting, brown denying, well-adjusted, perfectly assimilated adults. I lived when these adults bare children, taught us to pass, claimed no knowledge of sangre indígena, said we were Spanish, Portuguese, French, English, jamás indio, when taking back something we gave made us Indian givers, as if before the land was stolen we willingly gave it up and then changed our minds because, on second thought, we didn't want to be displaced and poor and hungry. I lived when your questions and doubts about my indigenidad, when you question me about my indigenidad, confirms my confusion and frustration and loss, because my parents and their parents and their parents' parents succeeded in raising a non-Indian indigena. The second piece is part of a larger piece which I've been working on, and so this is part way into it. Sorry. Okay, here we go. And this is how I encounter her. Moving along on this path, she came with them, the Latinas, wandering in unexpectedly into me. Me questioning how I can love their love and hate their love in the same breath. Wandering through each encounter suspiciously, waiting for their love to change, disappoint, abandon. Wondering what love would be like with one of them, what language we'd love in. Wondering how her body would feel against mine. She, whose body I longingly watch move through a crowd, whose embrace remains with me just a little longer than the rest. The feel of her hand on my back still with me hours later, in my bed. I wonder of the feel of the back of her neck against my lips, the taste of her nipples in my mouth, the scent of her on my fingers. She who looks at me with that intensity reserved for lovers, except we're not. So our encounter leaves me breathlessly intrigued, drawn in by her black eyes, the awkward way she slips her hair behind her ear, the slight shift of her lips into an almost smile when our eyes meet, that little wrinkle above her left eyebrow that creases when she talks about leaving her family back home. And I want to reach out and smooth out that beautiful wrinkle and tell her, todo va a salir bien. But I don't, can't, won't. Instead, I listen, attempt to understand what it's like to be here alone. Failed attempt, the best reminder of my privilege. Privilege I only now understand as such, in comparison. Privilege I have no words for in Spanish, because the notion of failure I learned in this language. So I listen her out of that conversation until the wrinkle vanishes, reappearing instead on each side of her eyes as she smiles at me. Shamefully caught staring at her lips, I give up trying to conceal my desire. Instead, lean in and gently brush my lips to hers. And she invites me in. Playfully familiar waves roll in, up, around my belly, and into my groin, until the sickness of home hits me like a 12-foot wave, stealing my breath, and I am there. In my privilege, in failure, in guilt, in shame, and sweet lust, I am home. Unable to speak in either language, I savor this moment into passing. The feel of her fingers on the waist of my jeans brings me back. Resting my right hand on the top of her chest, I pull her in with the other. We embrace long enough that her breasts against mine delight my insides everywhere, and that's all it takes. My hands slide under her shirt to the curve of her back. The touch of flesh numbs my brain, and all I can think about is how decadent the rest of her naked body will feel against mine. Unfaltering hands search deliberately, and I can no longer worry about which language this should be happening in, 'cause my brain is still numb, and my mouth can already taste her. And this last piece is untitled, but it's something that I often do when I think about what I want to write about. I want to write. I want to write them into this land, write their fears, their love, their desesperación for escape. I want to write them truth, not masked by possibilities or what could have been or what should have been, but truth, unrestricted, unbound, unresolved.